Welcome to Master Your Merger, the podcast for leaders navigating the people side of mergers and acquisitions. Each week, your host Klint Kendrick talks with deal makers, HR leaders, and integration experts to uncover what really works when it comes to people, culture, and performance during a deal. From retaining top talent to aligning leadership, you'll hear real stories and actionable insights from the people doing the work, all designed to help you make your merger work. If you're leading through M&A, this is your weekly playbook.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Master Your Merger podcast. I'm excited to welcome Dr. Marc Prine of MIP Consulting to the show. Marc is an industrial organizational psychologist and a recognized expert in talent and leadership assessment, especially in the private equity space. He works closely with investors and portfolio companies to align leadership teams with their value creation goals, using a mix of behavioral science, data-driven insight, and real-world business expertise. Marc is known for uncovering leadership strengths and gaps that can determine whether a deal succeeds or fails. With deep experience guiding leadership transitions and post-acquisition planning, Marc brings a practical perspective on how the right team can accelerate growth or stall it entirely. Marc, I'm thrilled to have you here to talk about how great leadership drives great outcomes in PE-backed companies. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Clint. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, Marc, we've known each other for years, so I've been really looking forward to this conversation. But for those folks that don't know you, can you talk a little bit about your background and what you do in the assessment and PE space?
Yeah, no, I think, I don't know if I could say it as well as you just did, but, so I started my career in, right after getting my terminal master's in kind of big box consulting. Think on the plane Monday, come home Thursday, lots of change management. And that's where I was first exposed to the M&A world, right? Doing change management on deals, helping people through the integration plan, helping people learn how to do their job, combining teams in the org redesign. That's really where I cut my teeth on the M&A side of things. And then after getting my PhD, I got really interested in the assessment piece. Right. There's this incredible book that I read once that quotes this guy that says, when you're looking at a deal, you're betting on the jockey as much as you're betting on the horse. Right. And I think that your book. That's your book, right? Yeah.
Well, I think I quoted you in my book, Marc. You're the one that said that initially. I think I've got two quotes from you in there. We'll jump into the second one in a little bit.
Yeah. So I mean, just the whole idea that if you have the right people in the right place, that's what's going to lead things, right? The mergers crumble all the time because of the people piece. And always and all too often, it's the people at the top that are the people that are kind of affecting it. So as I've kind of transitioned my career and I've built my own practice, the talent assessment has been the piece that is the most fun for me. It's been the piece that's really helped me identify the way that I can differentiate myself in the market and really help companies achieve that strategic goal.
Yeah. So, Marc, when you first get a client that's, say, a portco, what is the very first thing you look at to understand the health of its leadership team?
Yeah. So I think that it even starts before you ever talk to anybody on the team. All too often, you'll see assessment and diligence assessment, especially done with like a particular model, right? And this is what we look for. This is what's important. This is what we're going to do. And sure, there are some things that are just mandatory minimums, right? Hogan did some incredible research on kind of leadership teams and the qualities of top portfolio company CEOs. And what they found in terms of kind of the most important things are, number one, building and leading high performing teams. Right. As you're not making an investment in an organization if you don't want to scale it, and you're not going to scale it unless you have people in the right place that can grow and cultivate talent below them. Right. Number two is that kind of tough mindedness and sense of urgency. Right. Are they going to move at a fast pace? Usually when a deal is done, there's a 5-year window of kind of holding and wanting to make sure that you're not wasting time. The next piece is resilience, right? Are they going to bounce back from adversity? Are they going to pivot? Are they going to think through problems in kind of a clear-minded way? That kind of high adjustment if you're a Hogan person. And then the last one, which I think is the most important, is all about self-awareness and the willingness to admit problems. For a lot of the times, the people who I'm assessing are going to have a boss for the first time in 20 years, right? I work a lot with firms that maybe are going to be first time institutional investors, and they're going to be the first time that this person is going to have a board and a board chair and reporting and quarterly meetings and stuff like that. So being able to have a little bit of humility and admit problems, that's kind of step one. And so that is like the baseline of what I'm thinking about. But there's also all of these other models that people have of like what good leadership looks like.
Right.
And it's not all the same, right? The CEO of Coke could go across the street to Pepsi and completely fail because there's context and there's other things. And so when I'm working with the deal, the first thing that I'm doing is talking to the acquiring body, right? Whether it is a private equity fund making an acquisition, whether it is a portfolio company that is, doing tuck-in acquisitions, and I'm building a specific competency model. I'm identifying what is it that you need for this deal, for these people, for this situation to get you to the value creation plan. Because we need to make sure that talent assessment isn't an HR thing, it's a value creation thing. And so making sure that linking it to the value creation plan, and when the deal team looks at a competency model and an assessment report, they see the metrics and the things that they care about all over the place. And then assessing people based on that and developing people and giving feedback and all that stuff.
So can you talk a little bit about that, Mark? So for folks that don't understand the way PE works, right? You've talked about the 5-year exit window. There are usually very clear financial goals for that portfolio company, but it's a little bit different than the way strategics might do it, where there's not as much of a financial need, right? There's usually a product white space need or a new market entry need, but strategics aren't necessarily as focused on the financials, right? Making money is important, but it's not the only thing. Where in PEs, there is a definitive profit motive behind it. So how can you tie that assessment so clearly into that financial deal thesis?
So I don't think that it is very different because, maybe when there's a platform company and you as the strategic are that platform company, you're not necessarily thinking about it the same way. But for every deal that you're doing, there's a reason and there's a why behind it, right? We're going to buy this company because it's an emerging technology that we want to put into our portfolio. Great. Is the strategy going to be to roll them in, or are they going to sit as a subsidiary? Are the people who are going to be the leadership team of that company that you're bringing in, are they going to be running a business unit and in charge of profit and loss, or are they going to need to go around and kind of sell their technology internally and get other people to use it? What is that going to look like? So all of those little components and pieces, right? Is this a geographic, right? I'm sure plenty of the companies that you're talking about with strategics, they're buying companies for geographic coverage.
Right.
And or going into a new market, an adjacent market. And so again, what is that org design going to look like? What is the deal thesis, and how should the people be aligned so that all of the incentives are going in the right direction?
Yeah, that makes a ton of difference. I'm seeing a lot of LinkedIn activity lately, really regarding the strength of the leadership team making a difference. And it looks like it's an area that's finally really gaining some traction. What does that leadership team look like? So as you're looking at teams and as our listeners are thinking more about the strength of that leadership team, what are some of the most common red flags that you see in leadership teams during the process? And what are some of the green flags that you tend to see?
Yeah, I think, the inability to delegate, right? And a lot of the times it's the people who they built a company and they've maybe built it, right? They've kind of grown the company to their Peter principle, right? And what it takes to get a company from 0 to 5 million in revenue is completely different than what it takes to get it from 10 million to 100 million, 100 million to 500 million. Right. Yeah. All of those take very different skill sets, and recognizing that. And sometimes it's just putting the right person in the right seat for that time. Right. I have one CEO that's part of one of my clients' portfolios, and he says, I'm a $250 million max guy.
Okay.
Once a business gets to 250 million in revenue, we bring in another CEO. I go back to a $10 million company. I build it to 250, and then I kind of go up and down that ladder multiple times, because he's like, that's my skill set. That's my sweet spot. That's where I know that I can be successful. And that, I mean, that kind of self-awareness doesn't exist most places. A lot of people think that they can be the next Mark Zuckerberg and take it from dorm room to, $1 billion, but that's an exception, not the rule.
Yeah, definitely different skills. So you've talked a little bit about that 5-year exit, and in my experience, the world of private equity moves fairly quickly. So how do you, as you're working with these companies that are in short diligence timelines, how do you balance that need for quick assessment versus the depth that's really required to truly understand a leadership team?
Yeah, so I think that it's kind of measure twice, cut once kind of mindset. There's some really good research that's been done that shows the speed of acting completely related to the rate of return on the investment, right? And if you change out a leadership team CEO within the first year, your chance of getting your investment, your IRR is 36%. Whereas if you wait more than a year, it goes down to about 5%.
Wow.
Right. And so there's kind of tangible ways of really identifying, like, this isn't going to work. Right. In the way that I like to put it to my clients is, a lot of times they'll say, all right, let's give them 6 months and see what happens. Right. In a 5-year hold, that's 10% of your hold time.
Yeah. We just got out of one of our conferences that we run, the People Synergy Summit, and I was having a sidebar with an operating partner who was in the room. And, he made the comment to me, Mark, that he has never seen a company regret swapping out the CEO early. And in fact, they usually regret doing it too late. So I hear that from a lot of folks, that you want to make sure you get that right early on.
Yeah, there was some research actually that Alex Partners did a couple of years ago that said 4 out of 5 people said that the deal team partners said that the changing of the leadership team took too long.
Yeah. So let's talk for a minute about that, because I think we tend to pay a lot of attention to the CEO in particular, but in conversations you and I have had and conversations with other folks, it is a team sport. I mean, building a company isn't just about the CEO. So how do you think about individual assessment versus assessment of the leadership team, Mark?
So they're one and of the same, right? When I'm doing a leadership assessment, I'm looking at each individual as what they're doing and what their role is and where that role needs to go, as well as the team, right? You can get by with maybe a less strategic, CEO, if you've got a really good chief strategy officer who's on the team and working in kind of scaffolding that. One of the things that I always love to do whenever I'm doing an assessment is I ask each individual, okay, the deal closes tomorrow. What's the strategy moving forward, and how does the strategy change? And I want to see how aligned that leadership team is. I want to see how closely are they telling me. And so some of the quick wins is just giving them, hey, you're misaligned here. Like, have a session, talk about it, make sure that there's no daylight between people. I also want to point out that I think a lot of times private equity operating partners and a lot of people in the M&A space get it wrong, because executive assessment is flashy and it might be a little bit more avant-garde, but it's the rest of the team that actually matters most. If you're not doing a good 9-box or talent calibration within the first 3 to 6 months of owning a business, you have no idea what you bought, right? You bought a pretty dashboard with a terrible engine.
Yeah. We've had a lot of conversation about that next click down talent, and really looking at that as part of your 100-day plan. So, speaking of that 100-day plan, so, fast forward, you've done the assessment, you've made the recommendation, the team is where the team is when they go ahead and do the buy. Once that deal closes, how does that assessment play out during that first 100 days, in addition to the need to click down a level or two?
Yeah, so there's a number of different ways that you should use assessment data, right? And assessment data should not stop at diligence. That should turn into an individual's action plan of these are the things that I'm doing and this is how I'm going to do it, right? This is where the person who's never had a manager or hasn't had a manager or a boss, right? I like to sit down with that CEO and that board chair and really say, okay, well, here's their action plan. Here's what they're doing. Here's what you can expect by the next board meeting. Here's what metrics or things you should do to hold them accountable for. That's really where good assessment should turn into an action plan, should turn into performance management. And then a year later, you should be doing a 360 to see how well did they do on these things.
Yeah, so it's an ongoing process of really making sure that leadership team has got what it takes and is doing what it takes.
Yeah. And at some point, right, you might know, like, we're at $100 million in revenue and our goal is to get to 500. We know that we've got the $250 million person. And we know that at some point we're going to have to make the change. And so just knowing and doing it purposefully on time, right?
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. So, I would love to hear a story about where some leadership assessment that you did uncovered something maybe a little unexpected and how that changed the trajectory of an investment.
Unexpected. Okay. So this is a fun one. It was done a long while ago. So, was doing a diligence where, as we were starting, the deal team said, "Hey, we're not going to keep the CFO. We know that we're not going to keep the CFO. He was hired when he was 24 years old because the CEO liked his KPMG auditor, and we're planning on making a dozen different acquisitions per year. This isn't going to be the person, but we're going to put him through the process because we're not going to do it during diligence. We know that we're going to just kind of go along with it. Okay, fine. Put him through the assessment, and this kid was incredible. He was not just really good from a process orientation, closing the books, making good leadership, build a good team, humility, feedback, plus all the potential in the world to do all of the things they were going to need him to do. And I said to the deal team, like, listen, I know that you're thinking about getting rid of him. I'd recommend that you actually invest in him instead of get rid of him. I think that there is a lot of potential here. And if you put, a fractional CFO in place to help him through the first 2 deals, that's all he's going to need, right? We did a little bit of coaching on like going out there and selling the vision and, all of that kind of stuff. Put in the fractional CFO to help with some of like the nuts and bolts of doing a deal. He ended up being the CFO for the entire hold of the period. He was incredible. It was really just something that I put a lot of social capital into saying like, hey, don't get rid of this 24-year-old kid. I put a lot of eggs in a basket with that client, but it was the right thing to do, and it worked out, and he was great.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love it when the unexpected is a success story like that. That's really amazing.
Yeah, it's fun.
So you and I have talked a couple of times about culture. And I know that culture fit comes up a lot, and it's kind of a squishy construct, right? Folks sort of know what they mean by culture fit, but there is a little bit of science behind it. So how do you think about culture fit? And then how do you weigh that against things like technical skills or business acumen when you're evaluating senior leaders and their teams?
So cultural fit and the personification of culture are behavioral competencies. Right. And that's what I'm looking to understand and benchmark of, how do we do work? How do we communicate? What works? What doesn't work? What kind of leadership is being executed? Do we need somebody who is and a leadership team that are strategic, that are nimble, that are pragmatic, that are roll up your sleeves, get it done, right? Those are behavioral, right? Like I've got my Corn Ferry leadership architect cards right next to me, right? I never go too far without them.
Right.
But those are the things that will then personify the culture. And what's really nice about them is they're measurable, they're visible, they're things that you can build your selection process around, they're things that you can build your performance management around. They are scalable to what you need. And so you can actually think about a cascading leadership competency model, right? I just built a competency model for an organization where we did 4 levels, and we had kind of the same levels of leadership from, this was a one of those kind of like plasma centers that it kind of collects plasma.
Yeah.
And so from the phlebotomist all the way up to the executive leadership team, what were the core behaviors that they needed? What were the things that were going to be most important? And how does that progression look so that they can hire for people, they can develop, they can do succession planning and think about culture that will grow.
Right. I love that. I remember early on in my career, I was working on one of my first, dozen deals or so. And I got a card from the deal team that had a couple things side by side. It had the business case, it had the names and the titles of their top leadership team. And then it had a culture assessment. And the line on the culture assessment was good culture fit. Like that was the line.
Good
and I was sitting there. With us as the buyer, but
Yeah.
what cracked me up about that, Mark, was that when I think about this, I was working for a heavy manufacturer, 60,000 plus employees in 70 countries, and we were buying a 20-person startup in somebody's garage in a different country. And I just love the fact that culture fit in that case meant we like these people. Right.
Yeah.
That's what it came down to is we like these people and we think we can work together, which I appreciate, by the way, that we think we could work with them. But the idea of culture as a set of behaviors, I think it's something that a lot of folks have yet to wrap their head around is that really culture shows up in how we act and how we interact with one another and not just a value statement on a page.
Yeah. The best thing that the way that I really like it is you take your mission statement and then your vision and then your values, and then how do you actually live them, right? What are the things, right? There's all of this research that shows basically zero correlation between the poster of people's vision, on the poster on the wall and how they actually act. Well,
right.
If you want to measure what matters, then let's do it. Let's put some metrics to it. Let's put some behavioral competencies that you can see and feel.
Yeah. The example that I use all the time is the number of startups that I've bought in my career that have a value statement. And one of the values is almost always something like have fun, right? Have fun is one of the values. And when I think about how that plays out in my personal life, so my idea of having fun, I love roller coasters, love going on roller coasters. My idea of having fun is going to Six Flags and riding roller coasters until I puke or can't walk anymore. Like for me, that is a great afternoon. Now there's probably a lot of people listening that are like, I would rather die than go do that. So I feel the same way about my younger brother's idea of having fun, which is strapping 70 pounds of gear to his back and walking into the woods for a week. That sounds like hell to me, but to my brother, that is having fun. And so when I think about these value statements that we see and how they play out, I just think about the difference between what's fun for me and what's fun for my brother and how much daylight there is between those two things.
Sure. Yeah. But you can look at it and there are ways to measure and think, okay, well, if we want fun to be part of our culture, okay, well, then let's think about something like the Hogan, where on the MVPI, there's a hedonism score that is kind of about like open-minded cultures, engaging work, liking to try new things, openness to experience. Okay, well, those are things that we can then think about and measure and do in a workplace that has nothing to do with beer kegs and ping pong tables and wearing jeans on Friday.
Right. Great examples. So, Mark, we talked a little bit earlier on about CEOs and replacing them. And obviously, replacing a CEO is one of the biggest decisions that a buyer can make.
Sure.
What are some of the factors that you've seen that tell you it might be time for a change?
So resistance is going to be one of them. Some major skill deficiency, right? And desire, a lot of times people come up with good ideas. They become the CEO of a company and they're just not the right person. right? And so a lot of the times I'm having the conversation with them after an assessment and debriefing them on the results and being like, have you thought about being like a chief development or chief, technical officer? That's like, where do you want to spend your time? What do you like to do? What do you not like? Like, here's what the job is going to entail moving forward. Like, how much of that are you excited to get out of bed in the morning for? And using the bad Mark Cuban quote, like, would you rather have 80% of a grape or 20% of a watermelon? If you relinquish control on some of this, right? Like, keep your CEO title, bring in a president, bring in whatever you want to call it to actually run the business and help turn it from a product into a business or from a whatever into a high functioning business. You're not relinquishing all your equity as it relates to this. Like, let somebody else help you build intergenerational wealth here.
Right. I remember a while back, I was having a conversation with an HR leader of an acquired company about the CEO. We were partnering to really help that CEO be successful. They had moved from startup mode to being acquired by the company that I was with at the time. And the CEO was focused in that moment on a bunch of customer renewals. And we didn't buy that company for the customer base. We bought that company for the technology and what that technology was going to bring to the buyer's company. And I remember having to be quite blunt with that HR leader in the moment. I'm like, look, this guy's job for the longest time was fundraising, right? And so renewals in that old mandate was really what was important in that job as CEO, right? He needed to ring the cash register, bring in investments, bring in customers. That's not why we bought you. And what we really need him focused on is getting that product that we bought in sort of a middle stage market ready so that we could add it to our product suite and go monetize it. And it was a very different skill set. And working with that CHRO, who was a trusted advisor to that acquired founder, we finally got him to switch from that fundraising to that product development piece. And so I think had that company been more open to looking at true CEO assessment, we would have understood a little bit more some of the challenges we were going to have getting him out of fundraising mode and into really bringing that product across the finish line.
And a lot of the clients that I work with use assessment less evaluative and more as a way and as a mechanism to help make that transition, right? Because what you're talking about, there's two different questions, right? Like, is it a skill versus a will problem, right? And you're absolutely right, where they were focused in one direction the whole time, and that's why when I'm debriefing an assessment after I meet with a deal team, right, whether it's a CEO, CFO, whoever it is, every assessment starts with reviewing the competency model and like, hey, you used to have to do this. That's not as important anymore. Here's what your new priorities are. Right. And making sure that is like, and knowing that it's going to be hard because that's what they've done for a long time. And that's where their comfort zone probably is. And that's probably where they've pushed themselves the most to learn and develop because they've known, sell or die. And so make that transition.
Yeah. Well, and I would also say that that's what had them be successful, right? That's what had them build a company that somebody else wanted to buy, right? So it's paid off this set of behaviors that may not be the set of behaviors that we need once they've been purchased.
Yeah. No, that's a great point.
Yeah. So, Mark, you've been doing this kind of work for a while. What are some of the trends that you're seeing in how PE firms approach talent and leadership today compared to, say, 5-10 years ago?
Yeah. So I used to say that consumer education was the hardest part of my job. Now I get a lot more people knowing big firms that are doing talent assessment, or a lot of firms who have talent operating partners like you're talking about, and they're thinking about it and it's part of the process and it's something, right? Like I get a lot more, are you Wendy Rhodes from Billions? Then am I one of the Bobs from Office Space? Yeah. Right. That's my career started either Bobs from Office Space. Then I went to George Clooney and Up in the Air. And now it's kind of Wendy Rhodes. And so with that, there's been a little bit more of, consumer education from that part. And so, you're seeing good talent scorecarding, the way that I'm talking about it, kind of be part of the process. You're people being much more proactive in talent strategy, being a part of that value creation plan, and knowing that that's something that's got to integrate in well. You're seeing a lot more investment. I think there's too much top heavy investment in the C-suite, and that's kind of where things seem to be settling for right now.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a need to go deeper in that organization, like we talked about.
Yeah, I've had a couple of conversations with some technology providers that are using passive data and AI to try and get at deeper levels of team assessment because it is such a daunting task, right? I think part of the reason we focus on the top is that it's just easier, right? You've got a finite number of people, you've got a fairly well-defined set of competencies, and I think it's just harder in
Yeah.
a 300-person organization to get the level of information that's needed. So I'm really hoping that the AI will help with that. But until that happens, Mark, how do you recommend companies look at those next couple of clicks below that C-suite?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's having good performance management practices and actually rolling out some, good pieces. Listen, I love AI for a lot of different reasons, but I think that organizations need diet and exercise before they try to take Ozempic,
Yeah.
right? Because I don't think that some of these magic bullet things will fix the problem, right? Because that will just cause a lot more problems because they're not thinking about how to use it the right way.
Mm.
And I think that the talent muscle is something that a good value creation plan is building throughout the company, right?
Yeah.
And when you get to that point where, okay, the first year, it's going to be hard. And the second year, it's going to be, oh, we're doing that again. And the third year, it just becomes, oh, we've done it. And this is the way we've always done things now. And you get to the point where managers are good at talent calibration and they're good at interviewing and they're good at, assessing their own people, that you've created a scalable system.
Yeah, that's a great point. So as we begin to wrap up, Mark, if you're talking to an executive who is stepping into a PE type role, they've sold their company or their company's been sold into PE, what's some of the advice that you would give them other than what you just talked about, really, really keeping an eye on the talent deeper into the organization to drive value? But what advice would you give them to thrive under the unique pressures of a PE-owned environment?
Yeah, I would make sure that they understand what is the value creation plan, right? What is the strategy? What is I asked to see what was the investor decks that my clients are bringing to investment committee, because I want to see what are the things that they're selling as this is why we're betting on this horse,
Yeah.
right? And that's exactly what every executive should know, what the value creation plan is, and everything that they're doing should be aligned, because that'll just make their job so much easier. And I'd also recommend Adam Coffey's book, The Private Equity Playbook.
Yes. Yeah.
I have a client that buys that for every single executive when it's their first time ever being owned by PE. And just understanding the what's in it for me.
Well, and talk about a guy who has an eye on talent. The first time I heard him being interviewed on a podcast, I was just like, I got to know this guy, because he literally talks about talking to your line level talent and listening to your line level talent to understand what's going on in the organization and the difference that talent can make with customers. I was just blown away by how insightful he was and really how well he kept an eye on the talent ball. So speaking of talent, Mark, in closing, we talked about the couple of quotes that I've stolen from you, right? So the one is bet on the jockey, not on the horse. The other quote that every time I say this, it resonates with folks, and I shamelessly stole this from you, which is, if headhunters are sharks, an acquisition announcement is blood in the water. So if the talent really does make the difference, how do you encourage companies to look at retaining their most important people?
So this actually goes back a long way, right? And I think, again, this is one of those diet and exercise type things when it comes to employee engagement, and making sure that when you're creating a strategy for a company, you're giving people engaging opportunities to do really cool work.
Yeah.
And to work hard. And the research between things like making sure that, the alignment between goals and strategy of the individual and the organization are there, right? That's going to get some good retention numbers. Giving people a reason and why, and being transparent, right? And once people feel like they were bait and switched, that's broken.
Yeah.
Right. And so psychological safety, that goes both ways, not in the squishy psychological safety, but in just, I'm going to give it to you straight and you're going to give it to me straight. And I know that we're in a good relationship back and forth. Right. And when you don't know, say, I don't know. That's a great question. We're going to find that out. Right. And telling people what you expect. I think there are a lot of really creative things that I've seen happen. Right. I've seen some PE firms that start to ESOP part of their equity. And so every employee gets some shares of the company and they're incentivized to get to that next exit. Yeah. I think that's great, but it's really hard when, it's that day to day, right? Because day to day good management, day to day people understanding, right? Incentives that people see in their in their paycheck once a quarter, probably not going to be the thing that retains them.
Yeah. Great point. Well, and I happen to know, I don't know that a lot of people know this. We used a common data set in our dissertations. And so, we probably had some things to say about employee engagement, given that was one of the things we were measuring.
Klint is the reason that I am a PhD.
No, you're the reason you're a PhD, but I appreciate that.
If it wasn't for you, sir, and being a year ahead of me in our program and letting me kind of join on the data set, I don't know. I'd probably still be in dissertation purgatory.
Well, I certainly wasn't fishing for that, but it was my pleasure to read the research that you got out of that, because I learned a lot more about employee engagement and really the difference that a solid onboarding program makes in how people feel about their work and how likely they are to stick around. So Marc, on that final note, how can folks get a hold of you if they'd like to chat more?
Yeah, absolutely. So LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to connect. Feel free to email me, Marc at mipconsultingllc.com. We have a website, mipconsultingllc.com. Happy to talk to anybody and nerd out on assessment and people data.
Perfect. And we'll go ahead and put those in the show notes. And for folks that are looking for Marc on LinkedIn, it is MARC. Rather than a K. I'm a Klint with a K, so we'll just say we swapped my K and your C, and we have more traditional spellings that way. Marc, fair. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I'm sure that there are a lot of folks who got a lot of insightful information from our chat.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Merger, hosted by Klint Kendrick. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this valuable, share it with someone leading through a deal. To explore toolkits, resources, and upcoming programs, including our free roundtables, visit masteryourmerger.com. We'll see you next time.